My friends and I know that I love to travel with my family. And not to sound like a travel snob, but when my family and I travel, we try to go off the beaten path, and we try to immerse ourselves in local culture. There is so much of the world to see, and there's so much we can learn about ourselves and about mankind from seeing the world. While I've had the privilege to visit many cultures in Western Europe and South America, no group of societies has stood out to me more than those of Asia, specifically Southeast Asia. Over winter break, I had the opportunity to visit Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos. And what I saw in that region of the world made me realize that people with ostensibly so little actually have so much more to offer. This made me question my own Western values. How are the people of East and Southeast Asia able to accomplish so much despite few resources? What factors of their history and philosophy make them so friendly and welcoming towards tourists and each other? And why were they seemingly happier despite widespread poverty? What I realized is that there are three things that the West can truly learn from the East. The first is the lack of materialism in Southeast Asia. You've heard the expression, image is everything. And that's truer than it's ever been in our society. The social media landscape reflects this reality in America, when there's too much emphasis on outward appearance and image at the expense of other values like ethics and empathy. And this pressure on maintaining or creating an image to project to the world is fueling American consumerism. Happiness rests on the purchase of a good, and not just being good. In Laos, the locals would gather and kneel on an unpaved street to give alms to the Buddhist monks. They would bring with them various foods and other items without any hesitation and without feeling like this was a burden or chore. This was a daily ritual, and they would give whatever they had, even though they had very little. My family and I participated in this, and what I witnessed was the beauty of the culture, that giving brings people together, and that giving is a selfless act, and that when you give, there aren't strings attached, and there's no need to put too much value on things the way we do in the West. The second thing we can learn from the East is the emphasis on the family. And when I say family, I mean the entire extended family. Cousins, second cousins, third cousins, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-aunts, and that crazy auntie everyone makes fun of. In the West, we have estrangement, even amongst members of the nuclear family, not to mention complete unfamiliarity with the extended family. I mean, how many of you celebrate holidays with cousins or even know that you have a second cousin once removed? There's a Chinese philosophy named Shao, which translates to filial piety or parental care. It's a practice that has been around since the Confucian era and describes two things: a deep connection between a child and a parent, and a repayment from the child to the parent. This philosophy transcends boundaries in Asia and seems to be a common value amongst many Asian cultures. Obedience to the parents while growing up isn't a matter of choice, it's the way of life. While we were exploring the city of Bagan in Myanmar, I got to know Kai, who was our tour guide. While touring the temples, Kai told us a story about her family, and she spoke about how she cares of her mother on a regular basis. As her mother reaches the age where she can no longer take care of herself, Kai's obligation is to be the caretaker as a way of saying thank you to the sacrifices her parent made for her, as she described it. When we were about to leave Myanmar to enter Cambodia, Kai handed my sister a small box with a ribbon. She said it was her Christmas present to my family. My sister opened it, revealing a beautiful figurine of an elephant engraved with some characters written in Burmese. We were moved by the gesture, and I have to admit, I was embarrassed by the gesture at first, as I considered the irony of the situation. Shouldn't we have given Kai a gift? And the thing is, it didn't even occur to me to even give a gift, a token of remembrance. Instead, we as American tourists only think of reward as monetary. That of course we would give Kai a tip, but not a gift. And that underscores the difference between the East and the West. The third thing we can learn from the East is how to value education. For the past decade, Asia has been surpassing the West in terms of educational attainment. Countries such as South Korea, Japan, and Singapore have developed some of the most effective education systems in the world. Meanwhile, here in the United States, we all know the trend in education is downward. And the difference in attitude towards education rests on one key difference: the matter of priority. Our guide in Laos was named Ye, who had taken us to give alms to the monks. During a conversation I had with him, he told me about his childhood growing up amongst a mountain tribe known as the Hmong. When he was 7 years old, he would walk an hour and a half one way through rocky and sandy landscapes just to get to school in the morning. This made me wonder what our excuse is for not getting to school on time or not going to school at all. In Siem Reap, Cambodia, we visited a local school to give toys to children for Christmas. We were accompanied by this gentleman named Mr. Tai, who during our visit explained to us how important education is to him and most Cambodians. He worked just so he could give enough money to help build a school that would educate the poor. A majority of his earnings went to sending 2 out of his 3 children to a proper schooling system. I think that because of our better lifestyles, we take this for granted in the West. It's interesting to note that as the 21st century has dawned, the geopolitical balance of power has shifted from the West to the East. And perhaps instead of pushing back against that shift, we'd all be better serving to understand the underpinnings of what makes Eastern culture poised to take over the reins of power, beginning with the traditional values that are giving them a modern edge. And over time, we could take what is best of both worlds, and as one group of people, make the human race as best as it could possibly be. Thank you.